Welcome back to Rise and Tell with Sheekha. I am Sheekha Singh, your host and author. I have got something special to share. My brand new book, Unburnable Ambition, How Overachievers Win Without Burning Out, is coming on Jan 5th, 2026. This book is for all of us who dream big but refuse to let burnout be the price. If you'd like early chapter, preview, and launch bonuses, head to sheekasingh.com/unburnableambition and sign up today. Now let's dive into today's episode. I just want you to do one thing today. After you listen to this episode or any of the episodes from the podcast, share it with someone you feel is going to benefit from it. This is my way of paying it forward, and you will be helping me reach my goal of making sure my podcast reaches to as many people as possible all over the world. And thank you for being a part of it. Let's get started. Our guest for today is Rod Berger. I was highly impressed with the way Rod spoke on this episode, the way he shared his experiences, and the way his professional expertise of storytelling came into picture. You know how you've always wondered how everyone has a story? Well, Rod Berger, as a host of over 4,000 interviews, has understood the benefit of storytelling and now has published a book called The Narrative Edge, Authentic Storytelling That Meets the Moment. And it hits the bookshelves in November. He's captured stories of so many people, including NBA greats Magic Johnson, Charles Barkley, United Nations officials, and has an audience with the Pope and the Crown Princes of Sweden, and documented stories on behalf of water aid in refugee camps across Africa. He has served as a guest lecturer for Vanderbilt University's Owen Graduate School of Management for nearly 2 decades on the power of storytelling in business. He is a professional editor, writer, creative coach, advisor, interviewer, and a keynote speaker who has authored hundreds of articles across iconic publications. He's traveled to Africa, Nordics, Europe, North America, securing stories across cultures for audio, print, video, and social media storytelling. He was recently recognized as one of the 100 voices of the future chronicled in a new book out of Dubai. He has a television development deal with the Jim Henson Company and his publishing deal with Wiley. I thoroughly enjoyed the professionalism and all of the stories about storytelling that Rod brought in this episode. I'm pretty sure you're going to have fun too. So let's get started. So there you go, everybody. Today we have with us Dr. Rod Berger. Welcome to our show, Rod. How are you?
I'm fine. I really appreciate you taking some interest in my work, and I appreciate being on the show.
Of course. Happy to have you on our show. I have read all about you and your profile, and I want our audience to get the most out of you today. So why don't we just get started?
Okay, sounds good.
Rod, tell us something about your book.
Well, my book. Here's what I would say about it. I don't know if I intended this in the beginning when the publisher came to me, but it ended up being, I think it's a traditional, in this way, hybrid. I don't think there's anything traditional about being a hybrid, but there is, if people who have read me in different things that I've written, whether it's been Forbes or Entrepreneur or things across social media and other media outlets, I do share my own sort of experience of the individual that I'm either collaborating with, interviewing, sharing time or space with. And I really wanted that in the book. So when you read it, I hope you learn about the power of storytelling and that it really has no boundaries. It's a part of every element of our mind, our space, our experience as humans. And that I also share how that's impacted me as well. So my hope is that I take you on a journey. This is not 7 different ways to tell a better story, because that's just not in my DNA. I applaud those that can do that. Maybe in my next lifetime, I can whittle it down to something like that, but that's just not this book.
Awesome. Well, congratulations, first of all.
Thank you.
And from where do you get this inspiration to present your story in different forms?
I think it's about being honest with myself. It's interesting. I've interviewed so many authors in my own work, and the ones that I gravitate towards are the ones that I think they sort of forgot about the audience, not in a way where you're dismissive, but the first step was to say, I need to understand my own voice. It's like anything in music, in sort of the A&R world of trying to find the next, or a writer, you hear that from agents. They'll talk about, do they know their voice? And so for me, it's all about that. It's about being inspired because I'm not concerned about a review. I'm not too concerned about somebody wondering why I integrated in certain stories within a given chapter, because within one chapter, I can take you from Africa to Rome to Detroit to Northern Michigan, all around a central concept. So for me, it's all about that. It's about that transparency and being honest with myself. But Sheekha, started when I was my first trip to Africa. We're getting ready to land. Yeah. And I looked down at this landscape I've just never seen before.
Right.
Really hoping that I can embrace this new experience, and hearing that people talk about African fever, that like once you go, you just have it. There's something about the continent, which I can absolutely attest to. And as we were starting to descend and land, I just said, I'm tired of writing, worried about the audience or the reader. I am going to now just write the way that I know, that feels natural inside my own mind. And so I started doing journals that I published during those trips, and I got great response. And it was 100% me. It had nothing to do with sort of how an editor might perceive it.
Right.
And that was sort of the launching point for me to say, okay, my style has a place.
Right.
And so that to me is the most important.
Nice. Love it. Love it. Okay. So you've interviewed over 4,000 people, or you've done over 4,000 interviews, and you have a style of your own. You have this idea in your mind that this is the message that I want to convey, and you want to be true to yourself. But what is one of the biggest challenges that you faced when you were doing these 4,000 interviews? Was there any time where you felt maybe I'm not doing justice to this piece?
Oh, I like the close of that question, doing justice to the piece. I would say, gosh, that's a good question. Here's my thing. I remember when I first started interviewing, right? Now, look, my interviewing in general, if we're using the word interview in a very broad base, started long ago because I was a curious kid, always wanting to know. And I talk about my late father and how he grew up in Nazi Germany, and I would ask lots of questions and get literally nothing for years in that. So I've been in that world of sort of asking questions my whole life. I don't know any sort of other way. But when it came to interviewing guests from a media perspective, in the beginning, I would take be like 2 weeks or something to prep for a guest, trying to know everything, but I'm also a child of Star Wars. Right. And something about it, told me there's got to be a better way. And one time there was a change in a schedule or something, and somebody had to have that interview like in an hour or something. And I had very little time to prep. And it ended up being one of my early sort of what I would call, better interviews, because I wasn't stuck in my head, right? It was the trusting Obi-Wan Kenobi to just sort of go with the Force. And that's when I leaned into my work in mental health, my previous sort of life in that world, and getting my doctorate, was you just have to live in the moment. And if I even know just a couple of things about you, and I let sort of that yarn unfurl in front of me around my curiosity and maybe where you and I might go in a conversation, chances are it will be something that's organic. It'll be in the moment, and hopefully it will allow the guest to sort of have their own platform to express their value and what they are passionate about. So the biggest challenge really in providing that justice was not injecting myself into that. But I want to be clear, not in a way where, to me, it's about agenda. Like I don't ever. And when I've had celebrity interviews and, they'll have their handlers and you can't talk about this, or you're going to have to talk about that, I just sort of go, yeah, okay. Because I know that if I develop rapport early on with that guest, regardless of their celebrity, that they will then want to go down whatever rabbit hole we end up going down, as long as I don't have an agenda. And so, it's risky. And I don't know if I would I don't know how I would package that in advice for someone who's earlier in their career for interviewing, but trusting your gut is just, and not being afraid to share sort of an impact. That was part of it too. If I could share, if you said something that impacted me personally, and I could communicate that to you, all that did was strengthen our bond and our conversation within that given discrete period of time.
Correct.
That to me is different than having an agenda, right? And so the injustice to me is those rare times when maybe I felt like I had to have an agenda that was either injected into me through publicists and whoever else that had their own agenda.
Yeah.
And that's probably when I've not been at my best. So I do think it's important to think about that and to not fear putting in our own experience, because they're human. They don't want it's like hiring managers, like younger people. I talk about it in the book. They'll tell an amazing story in a first interview, and the hiring manager will go talk to leadership and say, wow, Sheekha, she's really good. And, she just told this fantastic story about how she handled, challenge and, obstacles. And then the next interview you change your story because you think, oh, well, I already used that. It's like, no. That first story was what got you in the door. Don't water it down with your second and third best stories.
Right.
So yeah, it's a delicate balance in there. And I think that, we can play a part, honor the guest, and then hopefully have a really good conversation that an audience will value.
Okay. That's awesome. I like it. I like that approach. Impressive. I want to know how you tie storytelling to business. I know you're a guest lecturer at a university and it's for a business school. So I'm really intrigued to know, how does storytelling come into picture for businesses and organizations?
So I'm glad you asked that question. So yeah, I did. I'm not doing that currently. I did that for almost 2 decades with Vanderbilt's Business School, Owen Graduate School of Management. It was really powerful for me in balancing sort of the human condition around therapy and mental health, media, and what people are either trying to say or what their objective is in even being interviewed, and then young professionals, early career professionals in a graduate setting of sort of high accomplishment in a place like Vanderbilt, and understanding where their story fits. And look, I'm a lucky, I think, guy in this way. I mean, almost every business publication over the last 2 years has had a minimum of, 3 to 5 headlines around storytelling and the impact it can have within leadership circles, corporations, nonprofits, startups. And really it comes down to this, and McKinsey just put out another report on storytelling in business. You have to have an essence of the character that you play in the different environments and settings and stages within your business. Okay. And if you don't, that authenticity will not shine through. And we live in an era where younger people are saying, look, purpose over profits.
Yes.
I am totally fine living and working in a gig economy because it's going to be challenging regardless. So I'd rather have the freedom of time and sort of environment is higher on my value prop scale. And so they want to know the people that they're following.
Correct.
That is sort of charting that course forward. And if you don't have that, and you don't share that story, and you rely sort of solely on your comms department and your marketing team to make something slick, it's going to fall flat. Yeah. And then you're going to wonder why you have this sort of talent, this vacuum of talent going out, because people are saying, well, look, I used you as a stepping stone. Well, why? Well, because I wasn't ingrained into the story that you were telling, or you didn't even tell a story at all.
Correct.
I mean, look, one of the key areas, and I'm doing a lot, I listen to a ton of podcasts. I'm following AI like crazy, trying to understand it. And I cannot believe the leaders that are ignoring it and or sort of acting as if it's just the internet. This is just the 90s. It's not. It's really not. And there are real concerns that your workforce has, your impending or sort of incoming workforce will have, and those that are nearing retirement as well. So there's not really a demographic within your company that's not being affected. And I think one of the first entry points is story.
Yes.
Some stories start with a bang. Some stories start with a whimper. Some stories start with a question. But you got to sit down and you have to actually think about that. And it goes to, what role do I want to play? right? Because I think a lot of leaders in their mind play either the hero role, or they think because of a big, let's say, change, that people think they're playing the villain or the protagonist. But you have to have that self-examination as
Right.
yourself, as a board, as a leadership team, as a department head, as a hiring manager, because that will impact that talent in so many different ways.
Got it. Okay. What about culture? You've had guests from all over the world, celebrities and royalty, so many people. How does culture play a part when it comes to storytelling or even putting your point across?
I like that question. I think culture plays a role. Here's what I would say. I would say that when I'm disappointed in sort of my contemporaries, because now there's so many people that are quoted in the media, right?
Right.
Is when it feels as if they are outside of the environment that they're interviewing in. It's like I've been in places where I have been the only white face for miles. And I have to be aware of that. And if I'm not aware of that, my own potential biases or the perceived bias that I'm maybe bringing into an environment, then I think I'm doing a disservice, and that I'm actually thinking more about me than I am the individual in the essence of wanting to find out about them and their story. So I have, to some, maybe it's, I think you have to do whatever's comfortable with you, but you have to, in essence, I think, be you.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And there's a real fundamental difference. Like it's so interesting. I was just in an Uber the other day in Canada, and I got so excited because I knew immediately that the driver was from the continent.
Right.
Was from Africa. And he, we immediately connected because of my experiences and in being in refugee camps. And he had been a refugee for almost 8 years. It was over 15 years between seeing his mother when he left and when he got to see her again. And I connected with him on that level as a human, right? And it was just such a wonderful connection. And I think it did maybe more for me than it even did for him, because I've allowed myself the best of my ability. And I'm not saying, look, I'm sure and I have regrets as well, where I should have spent more time with certain people. And I didn't. I sort of let a timing schedules get in the way of just saying, no, I need to stop and take a minute with this individual, because there's just so much there about the essence of who they are.
Correct.
And that's really powerful to connect with another human. So when I've traveled, I will use that overtly. I ask this gentleman in the Uber, right? We just had like a 20-minute ride, and I wanted to know, what do you call someone who is white, has a white face, as a foreigner?
Right.
And when I first did that in Senegal, people were like, "Oh my gosh, did you just ask that?" I said, "Yeah, I did." The funny thing is, when I've done that, it breaks down every wall.
Yes.
It's like all of a sudden I'm welcomed into the community in a way that says, okay, you're not what we thought.
Yeah.
Right? You're different. And now we can get to know each other. We can now, in a vulnerable way, talk about these sorts of things.
Correct.
And I just feel like it's a fantastic way to connect. And so, yeah, I think culture is so incredibly important. And to me, it also comes down to silence.
Right.
Right. I think in Western culture, we have to fill the airspace. We're doing that right now, but that's the purposes of it. Right. But I think the value of silence has been lost in a lot of the rhetoric and the chaos of life. But silence is a fantastic arbiter between different cultures.
Correct.
It really is.
I agree. And what a wonderful way of talking about such a powerful point here, Rod. I agree. I feel like the best people who I've met who communicate amazingly well are the ones that tell a lot of stories. And sometimes it is self-deprecating, like you just did with them, but that kind of lets the other person know that, okay, things are going to be fine. He's not going to just use his privilege or something of that sort. And that you feel comfortable as the audience or the other party, where you're like, okay, you know what? I can be myself with him and I can share my feelings with him or my thoughts. I work for a 100% remote company. But once a year, everybody meets at this retreat for 2 days. And you just see this size of a person every day, day in and out, in meetings, calls, whatever. But then when you actually meet the person, they are completely different the minute you start to ask them about anything. And as those stories start to come out, you see those layers peel off in that person layer by layer. And you're like, wow, you are nothing like what I thought. The image that was in my head is completely different from who you are as a person. And you're right. Storytelling is that tool that helps us bridge that gap that we have, or dismantle certain myths or thoughts that we have about this other person or culture also.
And it collapses timelines as well. Going back to your question about business school, that was one of my initial intentions, and it went so well, I used it for almost 2 decades, was so many of these young people, they would submit, so the only thing I would ask for was their resume. I wanted to see their resume before I met these students. And they would bury the lead all the time. It was the same thing. You just sub out the name and maybe the hometown and the undergraduate degree, and everything was the same. Whatever was interesting about them was at the very bottom. They didn't share any of it. And so I sort of reverse engineered it. And by doing so, all of a sudden, this student had a connection with the student across you know what I mean? They started to find these connections, not about their pursuits and sort of the tactical elements of achieving their graduate degree, but about who they are as people and the journey and the path that they took to get to that very room that we all shared on that given day. What does that do? It collapsed timelines where then they saw each other as resources through a compressed and aggressive timeline academically. And then they become friends right through that.
Correct.
To me, that's so much more powerful because you do connect in a way. It's an invitation, right? Yes. And some of that is the silence. It's the questions that are asked. And it's the follow-up that says, oh, wow. I have the same interest, or, I did, but I didn't have the courage to continue. How did you do that?
Right. Yeah. And I feel that it also makes certain people approachable too. Like in our setup, at least, when I've traveled, not as extensively as you, but what I notice is being, like you said, when you look different, when you are completely different, you're aware of a fact when you're in a different country. But the minute you smile, the minute you start telling your story, the minute you decide to break that barrier and talk to people just with a simple story, I think that itself plays a huge role. And when you get talking to people, you meet them, you discuss things over a drink or coffee, over a meal, you realize at the end of the day, even they are humans. They might look different, they might talk differently, but end of the day, all of us are humans and we feel the exact same thing. And you bring up a very good example of that demographic of young people, Rod, because I feel Gen Z especially is the most loneliest generation of all, thanks to technology. I know millennials grew up at the brink of it. Like, yeah, we did have some childhood without devices and distractions, but then we somehow ended up getting sucked into that whole thing. But Gen Z right away grew up with devices and distraction and screens and all that. And although they might have like 1 million followers, they don't have real friends who have their back. Some might, some don't. And I feel this, like, storytelling would be such an important piece where people can use it. Like, that's the first question that I ask people who ever come on my show. Like, what's your story? And then we get, like you said, follow-up questions. We figure out who that person is, what their background, their history is. And I feel like that's what people need to do. The minute you meet someone, if you're lonely, no matter where you're from, how you look, the minute you just break that barrier and start telling people something about yourself, or even a funny thing that happened to you, I think that opens up a lot and you start to build that relationship with the other person. It's funny you said that because I live in a very small town. I used to live in a city, like we were close to Toronto. We were just an hour away from Toronto, but then we moved further up north and it's a very quiet town. And there are a lot of people who are above 80. And there's this one woman who walks her dog every evening. One day I was just in the yard, springtime. We were new here. We had just moved. Last year we moved in summer, so never had any time to do any yard work. So spring was the right time. And I was in my front yard doing things, and she walked by her dog and she just started talking to me out of nowhere. She's like, you know what, honey, I think that's a weed right there. You need to remove that. And I think your husband has forgotten to mow this part of the yard there. And it was the other side of the sidewalk. I'm like, oh, thank you so much for telling me. And she just started talking. And I love how friendly she was. All Canadians are friendly, and I love them for it.
They are.
Yeah, but she didn't judge me for who I was, or she didn't, have any preconceived thoughts in her head about me or what I was doing. And she ended up telling me so much. I know what her ex-husband's sister-in-law is doing right now. That's the level of detail she went into. And again, most of it was just gossip, but then she made me feel so welcomed in the community. And I didn't feel like I was an outsider. And that to me is just amazing. And my mom and sister visited us this summer, and they're like, why are you living here? Like, there's literally nothing in this town. I'm like, wait till you meet the people. It's all about them. And she met my mom, and her name is Kathy. She met my mom, and my mom's like, oh, now I see why you like it here. It's just that she did the same thing with my mom, and my mom was shocked. She's like, wow, it never felt like I met her for the first time.
Yeah, your neighbor Kathy made an investment in both you and your mom, and
Exactly.
it's an invitation. And I think not that it's selfish at all, but sometimes the benefactor is the one that initiates that expression of vulnerability.
Correct.
Right, and the delicate nature of our confidence, of our ego, of our our hopes and dreams,
Yeah.
because then people say, "Oh, okay." But to me, a lot of it is a lot of times people don't share their story,
Yeah,
because they walk in thinking that they've already been given a negative review, like they've submitted the screenplay and they've already gotten no's.
Yeah.
When that's not the case at all. It's
Correct.
just that we live in this sort of synthetic world where everything looks great on Facebook or on Instagram.
Yeah.
And so, no one's going to want to know my story. And so they don't even share it at all. Yet,
Correct.
those even the fear of that is something that most, if not all, humans probably share at different degrees and levels, right?
Yes.
And yet we don't use it. And so Kathy I think that's a great example of, she just sort of cracked that door open, and the entire view of your community is different today because of that.
Correct.
It's so powerful.
Yeah, I love it. And now I do the same thing. Like if I see someone who's
forward.
Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, I do the same thing. And I love it. I love how you're tying all these concepts to different walks of life, Rod. And I'm excited to read your book. I cannot wait for it. I want to ask you, if based on everything that you've experienced, based on all the people you've met, everything collectively, what would be the top 2 tips you would give to someone today, knowing what you know now?
Top 2 tips if you're saying capturing a story, I think the number one is, and this is this concept, it's this notion of, understand the characters that you play in the stories that you live.
Right.
And so everything starts and stops there. I have to know if I'm playing the oak tree in a 3rd grade play on stage and I'm just standing there. I have to understand the value in that moment of my experience in front of that audience, and whether or not I want to pivot in 4th grade, as an example, right? As sort of a goofy example. So I think that's the number one thing. We have to understand the character that we play, because it will impact the bias, the approach that we take, the amount of, I think, grace that we give people in their story. And I think a way to understand that is marriage.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I would estimate that, a majority of the conflicts that partners have, it's really, it's not even just whatever that essence is that you're sort of having to negotiate. It's the way in which the stories are being relayed.
Right.
and the triggers that then sort of in sequence go off like fireworks.
Yes.
And it's because we've basically put to the side that person in front of us, and we've put ourselves center stage. And sometimes we need to be Robin Williams in Dead Poet Society. We need to have students stand on the desk like Ethan Hawke and say, "Captain, my captain," and understand that frame and perspective will change the way in which you think about story, the story that you tell, the story that you play, you live within. So that to me is absolutely number one. And number two, gosh, in this moment, in you asking me this question, I think you have to be not fearless, but you have to be, I think, aware of the line, right? And then I think you have to navigate that line as you might,
True.
Captaining a ship in the open water. You can see it, and you have to understand, given that individual that's in front of you or that group of people, how you may handle that. You might stay back from that line, whatever that line is, right? In the sensitivities, in the respect for maybe it's a different culture or the topic. One of the things that's been very humbling from the book process is getting blurbs and testimonials from people. And I'm very, blessed to have people in my network from all over the world. And so, that's been, I think, a wild experience. And the number one thing about that is just the confirmation that you went to your earlier, maybe it was your first question, my style.
Yeah.
And the voice. And it goes back to, there's a co-founder of Masterclass, Aaron Rasmussen, such an incredible human being. And I encourage people to follow him. Check him out on Instagram. He's an inventor at heart, and the creations he works on are just amazing. But I've interviewed him on several occasions, and he gave me a compliment once that it's not about me, but to me, it's the notion of how do we understand that line.
Right.
He had said to me, he said, you notice the line, and most people avoid it. And they sort of step back. He said, you actually cross that line. You extend your arm over that line and help us walk over it with you. That to me was obviously, I mean, for me, that was like the best compliment I've ever received, just in my approach and at my gut level, what I'm trying to accomplish, which is not something where I'm trying to outshine somebody else.
Right.
But I think it's a great example of, don't be afraid in story. Right? Don't be afraid that if you say something, it's not right, it's wrong. Because in the vulnerability of even making the mistake of potentially saying something where you're just sort of dead wrong, you're showing a willingness that will reveal itself in gifts from that individual later during that relationship as it continues to grow. Because you were not fearful of that. So I think people have to understand that, where's that line? Like on a stage, you know where it is. Because if you don't, you're falling either behind the curtain or into the pit, where maybe if it's a musical and you've got the musicians, right, or the front row. So that line is sometimes right in front of us, and sometimes it's not.
Correct.
And it's hard to find. But I think we have to understand that we need to look for it in the way in which we approach the story, because that will inform how we're being perceived, how our physical presence is impacting those around us. So I think those would be the two things that I would focus on for folks.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those tips, Rod. Appreciate them. And thank you so much for being an incredible guest on our show. I've learned a lot about storytelling, and thank you for all the tips and for sharing all your experiences with us. This has been amazing.
Well, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I look forward to following your show as it continues to grow as well.
Thanks, Rod. Thank you for tuning in for today's episode of Rise and Tell with Sheekha. My upcoming book, Unburnable Ambition, is all about how to chase your biggest goals without losing yourself to burnout. You can now sign up at sheekhaSingh.com/unburnableambition for early access and launch updates. Until next time, keep growing, keep glowing, and be yourself, and keep your ambition unburnable. Thank you.